Places we weren't supposed to exist. A space for conversations that don't always come out clean the first time. You don't have to have it all figured out before you speak. You don't have to translate yourself to be understood. This is where meaning takes its time. Come as you are. We'll figure it out together.
Hi, I'm Cher Griffin. I'm a PhD student in transformative social change, where I research identity development in late discovered autistic adults. I'm ADHD, a Gestalt language processor, and like many of us, carrying a small alphabet of other acronyms along with me. I'm also the creator of cognitive ecology, mapping your mind for self-understanding, the creator of the cognitive ecology model, and the founder of the Compassion Collective, a global mutual aid community for late identified adults. I write on Substack at The Cognitive Ecologist, and now I'm your host of We Weren't Supposed to Exist. And today, I'm really, really excited. My first guest is Jamie Hoerricks, and this feels like a long time coming. In a way that's a little hard to explain, Jamie's work is one of the ways in which I came to understand my own mind. Not the only way, but a very meaningful one. And I can honestly say that without their writing, I don't think I would have the same depth of understanding that I have now. I don't think this podcast would exist in the way it does. Jamie is an educator, a writer, and the author of the publication The Autside. They are also what I would call a system disruptor, someone who writes and teaches as a form of resistance. Their work spans things like holistic language instruction, decolonizing language education, and what it means to exist and communicate in ways that don't always fit dominant frameworks. They are ADHD, a Gestalt language processor, and trans, and bring all that lived experience into their work in a way that is both deeply personal and widely impactful. And I'm really grateful to have them here. So before we begin, I want to give Jamie a chance to introduce themselves in whatever way feels right, and we will see what emerges from that conversation. And then we'll talk a bit about their recent article published in the journal Neurodiversity. The script is not the silence, auto theory of a GLP mind in a pathologized world, which I see as a really important contribution, especially for Gestalt language processing and for adult autistic people. So, with that, Jamie, thank you for being here. I'd love to start with.
Wow. That's quite an introduction. Um that is I don't know how I could have said that better myself. So thank you very much everybody for coming on. It's been great and have a great day. Um no, I am just a wee school teacher. That's what I am and that's what I do. And everything around publications and stuff, because I am a Gestalt language processor and because I think in terms of language and language support, the outside has never been like content creation. It's never been like I'm trying to build a following or, a name for myself in the community. So all of this is really around me leveraging technology to support my own language needs, right?
Mm.
Because like No Place for Autism was not intended to be ironic, but it is. In the sense that, my profession does not imagine that students with IEPs would eventually grow into a teacher, a peer. And
Mm.
so none of the systems there support someone like me. Um, as you may know, I know painfully well, the Americans with Disabilities Act is generally optional in America, and it really depends on whether or not we are impactful to capital, right? And so the more impactful and the more capital has to spend its own money to accommodate us, the less they want to, and the more they can say no, and they do. And so from that standpoint, a lot of this I'm trying to help myself.
Mm.
So I have gigantic, explorations of what this means and what that means. And I write them down and I store them. And I get invited on shows and I panic. And I think to myself, so I've gotten better at this and supporting myself. And so I was a keynote speaker at some speech conference. And I said, well, I need to know what you're going to ask me, what you want me to talk about. And so then, that kind of theme, it goes into my head and it's never like the questions are never questions. The questions, they jumble themselves and my brain is doing through lines and analyses and what does it mean and how do I position it versus theoretical constructs that I'm comfortable with, and then out comes 20,000 words. And I
Mhm.
park them on the outside, and people find them useful, which is always surprising to me. And from that standpoint, that's where it started. And in 2022, when I first started doing things, it was because I had written a paper as a new teacher, encountering staff that were behaviorists and they were there for behavioral interventions with autistic students. And I asked a very simple question of one of them because she was doing something with a student who I had just inherited on my caseload that was not effective and it was damaging to their relationship, her and the boy. And I asked her very simple, do you know what alexithymia is? And she says, no, what's that? So says I to me, how can you deal with behaviors and autism if you don't know what alexithymia is? And so I wrote a paper, right? And I shopped it everywhere, and everybody said, no, we don't want this, right? And so I thought, I have to put this somewhere. And I investigated all the different platforms and stuff. And Substack turned out to be, again, I'm a school teacher. I know that means financially. It doesn't cost me anything, and it doesn't cost, you anything to read it. Um, and so I put it there. And then I kind of put more things there just to kind of store them. And then next thing you know, I have, several thousand people following and subscribing and stuff this many years later. And just astonishing to me, absolutely astonishing to me. And I think that's, where we encounter each other is on Substack,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think, the algorithm isn't as, aggressively hostile as Meta's and
Mm.
the other ones, but we do tend to encounter, kind of like minds.
Yeah.
And and that's fun. It's fun to know you're not alone in something,
Oh my
especially
gosh.
cognitive.
Yeah. It's so much fun. I mean, I, when you talk about like your intent wasn't community, but it happened anyways, like it did
Aye.
in a way that is just kind of self-organizing, right? Like it didn't you didn't set some rules or processes or practices or procedures or like this is how community building is supposed to be done. We just said, "Oh, I relate." And then someone said, "Yeah, I do too." Someone else said, "Yeah, I do too." And it just kind of grew in a way I feel like it's growing, like in this, I mean, this podcast is because people are seeing themselves in a way of organizing not just language, right? Like it's not just like I think you understand that. Like I read your work and like I'm still trying to grasp the words to express like what is happening, what is organizing inside me, and it's a lot of the reason why I started writing. Um, and it's like it's a need. Like it's not just I'm not doing it because I want to become Miss Popular Autism. Like that's just not has never been the intent. The intent is because like literally I didn't exist until I was able to understand myself in this way. Um, I wasn't a whole human. Um, and that to me was like a kind of sadness of like, well, wait, we don't have to do this. We don't have to fracture people like this. Like, if we know that things are organizing differently for people, that we're experiencing the world and perceiving things in a different way, including, the the Gestalt language piece is such a big piece for me, but it's not the only piece. It's like I've experienced the world one way and was perceived another. And it is like to me that is the injustice, right? Like the injustice is that we were being measured against something that wasn't how we were operating. And that feels
Well,
I think where a lot of the connection happened for me at least to the work was that it was healing in a lot of ways. So I think that's
I
why
think,
I do it.
I did not come into the language of Gestalt processing early, right? And even like the languages I was given around my diagnosis was, and I wrote an article about this about a month ago. How do you go from Asperger's disorder, which requires you to have the language, as opposed to autism in DSM-4,
Hmm.
to DSM-5 having level 2 support needs? Like, how does that reconcile, right? And so I try to kind of explain it in that, what they were recognizing in that DSM-4 context is scripts. Well, that at my age, mid-30s at the time, I had some fairly okay scripts in English and I could navigate things. And so, coming out of inpatient psychiatry after a shutdown and having no scripts for that and being in care longer than I should have been by like a factor of 10, because I had no way of letting the system know that I was safe to let go. And so I had to kind of, what I call stage zero. I had to kind of sit back and gather the scripts from the other inmates and say, okay, this is how they say these things. This is tone, intonation, calmness, all this. And I practice it a bit in my room and then I let it go. And the first few times it fails or whatever. But eventually I make my way out. And I was never a danger to myself or others. I just didn't have the words, right? And so they gave you this diagnosis and they use terms like non-verbal, right? And to me, that never made sense, but that's the only word I had for it. And so in No Place for Autism, that's the words I used because that's what I had. That was the script. It didn't fit, right? But my brain is not naturally verbal. It's not naturally with words. I did not learn language early. I did not acquire it at all. And so of the languages that I can navigate the world in, they're all learned. None of them are acquired. And so from that standpoint, I was never comfortable with it. But then when I became a teacher and I saw myself in the classroom, right? Here's these boys and girls that like they behave exactly like I do in terms of language and learning. And I thought to myself, well, there must be some kind of description in this. And I went down the avenue of foreign language, like learning a foreign language. And yeah, I went and got the diploma from the University of Toronto in that, so I could deliver that curriculum and stuff. But it still didn't fit right. And you have these silos where this is the autism silo, and this is the language silo, and this is the behavior silo. And they don't really talk to each other, right? And now there's psycholinguistics and all of, everybody's defending their turf. I
Mm.
just wanted to put all of these pieces together and I stumbled across Marge Blanc and I got her book. And I'm like, oh my God, what has this been? Right. And it was totally transformative. And, from that standpoint, holistic language instruction came out because I had the whole piece kind of in parts, different articles and different thoughts. But I'm with these teenagers who are struggling in literacy because the science of reading is a marketing slogan, not science. And they've been failed and they just kind of passed along and they have IEP, so who cares? And that's the systemic view. But I wanted something that works for my classroom. And so I just kind of did what I do. I went whole to part. I saw the whole of it. And now I have that missing piece, that natural language acquisition framework. And now I understand frameworks and how to apply them. And then I did it in my classroom and it worked.
Wow.
And so I wrote it as
Yeah.
holistic language instruction. And then the next evolution of that is the majority of my students speak English as a foreign language. And some of them are assigned the Spanish label because they come from the country of Mexico, but they're
Mhm.
indigenous. They're from Oaxaca. They speak Nahuatl. And so that's where decolonizing language education comes from, about preserving home language.
Yeah.
But all of these things, like all of a sudden, because I'm in contact with Marge, and now I'm getting awareness, this community you talk about, which scares the crap out of me. But now all these speech therapists are
Mm.
following me on Instagram and on LinkedIn and stuff, and they're connecting with the stuff that I say. And I get invited to these seminars and to speak as keynote at conferences, and it terrifies me absolutely.
Yeah.
Uh, I think I do better in these kinds of one-on-one things. Um, but is an evolution of thought, you know, and I'm of an age on a level of experience where it's really hard to kind of slip one past me. And so I see these patterns, I see the whole things, I wonder about the parts of them. And then, you know, at this point, I've had maybe 1,500 Substack pieces on Autside,
Hmm.
and I'm piloting a thing in the UK, and I'm the last one to go. I'm listening to people talk, and it's all kids, children, children, kids, teens, children, kids. And I thought to myself, well, what happens when these kids grow up? What happens? You know, nobody is imagining in this space what a mature GLP or just Gestalt, whole apart experience looks like. Um, and so I mentioned it in the keynote. I kind of went off script a bit and I just kind of riffed on that a bit of, you know, I was, even though I did not know it, a Gestalt processor as a child. I did not acquire language. Stage zero was a very long time for me of
Hmm.
quiet, almost until my teens.
Wow.
I was stuck in stage three until my 30s, right? I was functionally illiterate when I left school. And so then I left school because I was the age to leave school. That's, you know, okay,
Yeah.
it's time to get on with life now.
Yeah.
Um, and it wasn't until somebody recognized a bit, without knowing like the framework or anything, but a bit how my system works. And she took me under her wing and she taught me how to read. And then I, you know, slowly and then very fast gained literacy in English. But from that standpoint, I'm trying not to lecture, but I'm saying that, and I'm just kind of forming this thought in real time. If I'm whole to part in language, I'm whole to part in love. I'm whole to part in education. I'm whole to part in everything I do. And if we can imagine an adulthood of this, then we are not equipping children to enter into a mature adulthood. And so,
Yeah.
what does that look like? What does it mean to be married, hold apart? What does it mean to have adult relationships, hold apart?
Hmm.
And that's where sensual residue became a thing. And now it's almost 160 pieces there. So, I'm
Yeah.
like, ah, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I resonate so much, and I think other people will resonate a lot too. Just, everybody's story is different, and but I can still feel myself in your experience. Not that my experience was identical in any way whatsoever, but I can witness my own evolution of language from this state now, and see how certain aspects of the way that I organize meaning altogether is hold apart. And it always has been. And I can see it in my children. And this is where, for me, the stage of my growth and where I'm at is I can't go backwards, right? Like I can't go and, fix the things that happened that shouldn't have happened because we didn't know, you know. But my children are, they're young adults. And and it's like what happens in the United States is if you get diagnosed after the age of 18, all right. My children don't want diagnosis. They don't care. That's not something that their minds even are taking into consideration at 23 in the United States when things are they can see the whole, right? Like my kids can see the whole, and there's no way for them to part that in their lives right now, the way that our systems are designed and set up. And that hurts my heart, not just for my children, but for all the young kids that are going through school now that are not failing because they're not intelligent or not, like the things that the stigmas that are being placed onto young autistic children, young adults are so skewed, are so like they're not accurate, and we have social media that is pressuring this perception of what it means to be autistic in the world. And um that's why I think maybe your work did settle with me so much, is because I was like, this, like I see this. This is what I see. I see this something that's bigger than what we think we know. Like, and I don't know what that is. Like, I keep partying it too, right? In my own way that I'm trying to understand this because there's so many pieces to this, and not just young adults, older adults that are discovering uh, that their minds were working fundamentally different than what they were told or what they had believed about themselves, in their 40s, in their 50s, in their 60s, in their 70s. I'm having conversations with these folks all the time, and um, I feel like we just simply don't understand on a broader system level what is actually happening with autistic people. And so, I don't know, maybe we can kind of like that's why I think your article like is important because um it's a I feel like you opened a door. Like like maybe my work, and the work of all the other autistic researchers that are doing something similar to me right now with one foot, I feel like I'm in the liminal, like I have one foot in the institution and one foot outside of it, and I'm constantly trying to bridge this gap in and I'm not even sure what the gap is. Is it awareness? Is it understanding? Like what bridges that gap, you know?
Great. I think the institutional language, it took me a while to figure it out. Um, and I think auto theory is very important. Autoethnography is very important. I had to put references in the paper, obviously, Peters and Prezant and Blanc and so on, Aribati. Um, I had to put those in there because that's the language of academia, right? You have to build your work on their work, and we progress very slowly. But at the same time, I kind of queer the thing by throwing poetry and music videos in there,
Hmm.
and mentioning madness and the young ones, and no context that maybe Gen X would know if it was adjacent to the UK, but maybe not, right? And so from that standpoint, I kind of just riff, and it was how I was feeling at the time. And I wrote it in August of last year. And honestly, I thought it was just rejected because I hadn't heard from them. And then all of a sudden, I get, the editorial reply of, yeah, we just need a few little bits here and there where we would appreciate some references. And then it's good to go. I'm like, really? Well, okay. So can you get it done in 2 weeks? Okay, I guess, right? But I was very, very surprised. And from that standpoint, to get it in the journal, now it's citable. Now you can say, according to Jamie and her 2026 piece, now I can do auto theory of my own because it was accepted here. So in that sense, I understand the significance of it.
Hmm.
Um, and conceptually, I've written it in such a way that I mention everybody I need to mention and get them in the record. Um, it doesn't necessarily invalidate anybody's work or whatnot, but there was a couple of style things that I really wanted to do that I kind of argued with the copy editor over. And one was there are references on the reference list that I don't directly cite. And my answer to that was they wanted to remove them. And I said, no, I don't want you to, because they were inspirational. And so I don't want somebody coming back after the fact and saying, I see these same themes in blah, 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 and therefore you're a plagiarist, right? So I did
Hmm.
not want to do that. And that's how I explained to have them in there. But I also wanted them in there so that when you write a paper or when someone else writes a paper, that you can say, according to, whatever I want to say, as referenced in Jamie's thing and as she cites this,
Hmm.
then you can bring everybody along with you, right? And
Yes.
so from that standpoint, kind of queering academia, I think is very important and very strategic. And so I put my books in there. I thought about putting some Autside stuff in there, but I didn't want to be too
Yeah.
cheeky. Um,
Mm.
but I also wanted to be very, very kind of sideways about things, and that the closing reflection is a poem, right? It's not a paragraph, it's a poem. And so from the standpoint of like just discourse amongst people in academia, I've published a book of poetry and it's in its second edition. Oh, that's fine. That's grand. But it's self-published and so it's bollocks, right? We don't
Yeah.
care about self-publishing. All right, well, one of my poems appeared in an academic journal, so there.
Yeah, right.
But, kind of little vanity points. But I did not think that it was something that I could write in paragraph form. And so I put it as poetry. And
Yeah.
again, when I'm writing it, I'm thinking, oh, here we go again, Jamie. I'm going to submit something and nobody's going to like it. And then, to my eternal surprise, they did. And so there's that. But I just kind of laugh a bit, because it's got all the cheeky elements that show up in the Outside.
Mhm.
And aside from kind of, creative tongue-in-cheek stuff that really wouldn't make it past copy editing. But I think, in terms of getting it in there is important. I'm not important, it's important. And I want somebody, to take it further. Am I going to do it? I don't know. I've been invited to another journal and I want to see um, if there's a fit, but I'm not too certain about it. I have the field guide project that my mind is going overdrive on that will take precedence. And then I have a maths book that I'm writing for GLPs called The Story of Maths. So that will take up the bulk of my writing time,
Yeah.
aside from just jotting little scripts down for the different substacks. Um, but I think, in those sense, should you decide to do papers, should anybody decide to do papers, it is a nice, very comfortable, very strategically written that you can go anywhere from it,
Yeah.
right? And that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
That should I decide, should you decide, then we have that jumping off point. And
Yeah.
and it just takes one of us to do it and
You
turned
did
out to
it.
be me.
You did it.
After years of trying.
Yeah, well, you like laid the groundwork. Like honestly, like it's and I know you're so humble and I appreciate that about you so much. And so I don't try to make you blush like when I say things like this, but it's just the truth of the matter. Like this is a shift. We are in a paradigm shift and you are part of it and you're opening the doors so more of us can be part of it. And that I think sometimes in history, we know this throughout history, right? The early ones always get forgotten. And um, I don't know, like maybe I want that to change a little bit. Maybe I want like um, people to, allow the organization of this to happen organically, like to um, for it to not to queer academia in a way, right? And I think in my work, transformative social change is a lot of queering academia. It's a lot of um, uh, balancing a fine line um, and kind of and pushing it sometimes and pulling back and pushing and pulling back and at least that's what my experience has been. But I'm still early, I'm still in the PhD process and I'm still learning and I need people to learn from, right? Like that's I think really important. We need people to learn from and that's what I feel like your work and everybody that I've found through you, that's what you just talked about that, like the way we cite and how we present information. We've learned a lot about what we've done wrong and what we've gotten right in the autism world, even through kind of the evolution of more autistic researchers. And and I'm in that right now. Like I'm like, and there's so much perspective and all of it matters. And that's where I'm at, right? Like I've got this whole, and how am I going to honor this body of work that from real autistic humans, some of which has been uh, kind of, shoved under the rug. Like I found some stuff, like that's what I do is find the stuff. And so yeah, it feels to me like academia is shifting anyways, in a lot of ways. Will I think we're seeing a lot more value in qualitative research generally, but some of these other types of methods like autoethnography, like grounded studies, grounded theory studies, participatory action studies, I've read some participatory sensory like I've it's getting interesting, and so it's fascinating. It's like the mycelium is kind of lighting up, and um and so I watch all that, right?
Right. Oh, I congratulate you on persevering with PhD. In my own journey, I started in 2010 and I finished in 2018 with the dean's permission to be that extended. And I did not have the language of autism. I got diagnosed in the middle of that with
Oh,
Asperger's. But I was in the middle. So essentially, my dissertation is auto theory, because I was examining what I was experiencing in trying to go to college as me, not knowing Gestalt, not knowing autism. Um, I had been to 14 different schools that were all crap for my system. I'm sure they're great facilities or whatever, but it just didn't work. And I started looking at research on that. It was saying, you know, almost 70% of autistic, first years in uni, they voluntarily withdraw for a variety of reasons. And so that's kind of what began my journey. But then step by step, those first couple of years when you have to take the classes, right?
yeah.
And they're very language heavy. And of course, I'm very language weak. And, I'm taking a quantitative analysis class, but at the same time, I'm being asked to learn a computer program. So now there's this dual language load, and I'm a foreign language learner. I'm an English language learner. And so I would have to fail it a few times to get enough trigger time on the software so that
Ah,
I could go through it again and not have to worry about the software. And when I would explain this to my counseling team, they had no idea what I was talking about. It's just, some IBM stats software. What's the big deal, Jamie? I mean, why are you having this problem? And I didn't have diagnosis. I didn't have any of this stuff. I knew that I struggled, and I'm very stubborn. I think that's this competitionist in me or something. But so it was costly in that sense. I had to pay tutors. I had to pay, when I could not explain myself, and so I ended up having writing mentors. I ended up having stats mentors and stuff that I would pay because I wanted to finish this.
yeah.
And in the end, I started whole, like everything is crap, right? And then I distilled down to these four little things that really would make the difference for an autistic college student
Yeah,
to persevere. And
yeah.
I think now of those four, it's actually gotten worse for autistic college students. And the main one is, this is conversations I have with my students at school, is if you think about the stereotype of autism, we are very good at the thing that we're very good at. And if you're a Gestalt processor too, then you spend thousands of hours in your mind, almost like an AI, right? Working out all the angles, figuring out all the detail. You are an expert. And you lack social skills and you lack interpersonal skills and chit chat skills and stuff. And so you arrive as a first year and you meet a professor and in your mind, they're the expert and like, I can only talk to this person, and they hate you
Yeah.
because you're smarter than them
Yep.
and you know more than them. And so now you're dealing with power relationships and inverses, and you're thinking, wow, this sucks. I have a conversation with anybody here because they're all stupid and emotional and they all hate me, and you know I'll find a better place elsewhere, right? And
Yeah.
so some of the language that I use borrows from Alcoholics Anonymous about pulling a geographic. It will
Yeah.
be better if I go to this other place. No,
Yeah.
you're not. No, you're still processor, and you're still going to find people who don't like you because of it.
Yeah.
And so, from that standpoint, that Glasser's choice theory is the theoretical construct that ties everything together.
Hmm.
And what needs are we satisfying when we say no? I reject this. I'm leaving. What needs are the professors satisfying? Power and safety and all of these things are bouncing around. But I'd never seen Glasser's choice theory used in such a way, so that's kind of a novelty there.
Hmm.
I never saw Jared Reeser quoted in anything and his solitary forger hypothesis of autism, but that always made the most sense to me, right? And,
Yeah.
and so when I say things are worse now than in 2018 when I finally defended, there are on average about 200 studies out of China every year and roughly the same out of America that are looking for root causes.
Yeah.
And in my mind, when I hear root cause, I hear cure, right? And I think about, the speed of dark, Elizabeth Nguyen's, is there a pill that can switch off all of the things that make me me and make me neurotypical, right? But that's what root cause talks about,
Yeah.
right? And where I resonated with Reeser's hypothesis was understanding what we do about natural selection. Is there a function for autism, for these traits that we call autism? Is there a function for hold apart thinking? Is there a function for, I just want to stay in my room with my headphones on and play, video games or whatever? This solitary kind of lifestyle, is there a function for that evolutionary? And he seemed to think so. He made a very good case for it. And then I don't think anybody ever really picked it up. And I think he moved on as well. But I
Yeah.
really like that standpoint of, and I've explored it in a lot of different articles on Outside, you know, the monks at Iona who preserved the Western canon, right? Who wants to be in a monastery in the middle of the Highlands and Islands area at that time of human history,
Mhm.
just by yourself transcribing these texts? Like, what kind of mind could do
Yeah.
that in silence?
Yeah.
And to me, I think autism, it makes perfect
Yeah.
sense.
Oh my God.
Pattern recognition and
Sign me
solitary.
up.
Right. And I would
You-
love it. No chit chat necessary.
Yeah.
As a rule, keep your mouth shut. Oh, I'd love it.
Yeah.
And all of these kinds of things where you have the plagues of Europe and so on. And there's always a group on the outside of society that does well.
Yeah.
Right. But it's not just a white person thing. You have this kind of trait all throughout society, right?
Mhm.
These wanderers that push the boundaries, that try new tools and new things. And so I just kind of embedded that in there, right? And
Yeah.
and got it in a different publication and a different place. And again, to my eternal surprise, with very little language ability, I defended my dissertation to the committee and to their satisfaction and was awarded doctorate, and probably one of the most terrifying
Yeah.
times of my life, right? And I've been in violent encounters and fights, and I've been shot at and shot near and stuff. And that was more scary to me than any of that stuff.
You're not
You
making me
know,
feel very good about this.
well, I think, and I've said this before to others, I think, in terms of spectra, I am on the extreme of Gestalt, and language is learned for me, and the mitigating of Gestalts in whatever language I'm working in. It's why I write. I park them and then I can refresh and I can reference and I can look right here and say, okay, this is what we're talking about.
Mhm.
Um, but it has a cost. It has a very high spoon cost, if you will.
Yeah.
And so it's not something I naturally would do, right? On
Mhm.
days when my family's out, on the shops or whatever, and I'm by myself working, I don't say a word to anybody. Right? I don't think I'm bored. I need to call so and so. I don't do any of that kind of stuff. And from the standpoint of kind of interpersonally, if you stand out, like, I'm a child of the 70s. I was bullied senseless as a child. So I kept my mouth shut. I kept myself to myself.
Mhm.
Being queer, but not having a word for that. In the 70s, there was no word for how I feel, right? And I knew I wasn't straight. I knew I wasn't gay or whatever. I just, okay, fine. I'll just keep myself to myself. So I had no scrapes for navigating anything of, the first part of my adult life. So I'm always in shadows, right? The central residue stuff is queer San Francisco's late 80s,
Mhm.
me. Um, some of this narration is happening after the fact, right? I have clarity now. I can name things, but there's very few words in a queer club, right? There's no chit chat necessarily. Um, and so I go from that. What do you do if you are illiterate to make money, right? And so you sell your body. You do construction work. I was a bodyguard because I'm so big and handy,
Mhm.
and you're not expected to talk. You're expected, pace and a half behind and off to the right. Um, unless you're left-handed, then off to the left, but never mind.
Yeah.
Right. And so I was never comfortable being photographed. I was never comfortable talking in front of people. And then I got a job with the city of Los Angeles as an electrician because I'm pretty good with electrical things. And then 9/11 changed all of that. And my little band of electricians that I worked with became forensic scientists almost overnight, and not really wanting to, and having to go from whole to part again. And then, that kind of leads me to say that I've restarted my life 12 times, and every time from zero, from being taken from my parents and adopted into this American context to, restarting in Germany, I've restarted from financial zero, from language zero. And every time there is this stage zero where I have to just be quiet and learn the lingo of this new context. And so kind of me being me in forensic science, gathering the scripts necessary. I was the very first kind of big homicide case I was involved in. Um, it was a death penalty case, and my piece of evidence that I had processed was the key for the whole case. And it was, Mexican mafia adjacent and all is crazy stuff. And so I'm being asked about, how I know what I know, which is a very kind of preview of other things. Like Barry Prezant asks, how do you know what you know? I know the whole of it, and then I can tell you the parts later. But out of that, I found out something kind of specific about the legal context in California, and that is published is published. So it does not matter if my workflow, my process is published in academic journal, or if I write a book, or if it's, in a newspaper, published is published. And so that kind of sticks in my mind. And I think a lot of us queers are very good at social networking. And there's a small handful of people at the time around the world who are doing this thing. And we're all innovating in the moment because it's such a brand new thing. And I was very good at Photoshop. And so I wanted to use Photoshop, and I did in this case. And I knew how I used it, but I had no kind of scientific justification for that. And so through this kind of social network, I met people and I chatted to them, and I recorded some of it. And, so now I'm having some scripts around it. And I gathered all this together and I wrote a book, the first book I wrote. But I wrote a book and then I shared it with colleagues around the world and said, hey, what do you think? And so, one fella in Italy says, oh, no, you got this backwards, it has to be this way. One fella at the FBI says, oh, no, I would do this way or whatever. And so they're peer reviewing it for me, right? But as friends, as, kind of friendly crowdsourcing it. And so then I fix all those problems and I publish it. And it's self-published, mind you. But Forensic Photoshop was a bestseller around the world, and cases on cases on cases. And then agencies are paying to fly me to them to teach this process. And I'm like, no, I don't want to. I don't want to at all. Um,
Yeah.
but then something very critical in that career happened. And it's that artistic social thing that you don't really understand until it happens to you. But there was an LAPD lieutenant who would take me to briefings, technical briefings, because he didn't understand maths and science and stuff, and he just wanted to know if he was, being lied to or whatever. And so I'm sitting in this meeting, and these vendors are doing all these, presentations on stuff, and my mind is seeing the whole of it, and then it's very quickly doing the parts of it in calculus on physics, and it's wrong. It would never work. And so I scribble a little note and give it to the lieutenant, and he gets a little bit upset, and so he starts asking his question based on what he thinks I'm talking about, which he gets it kind of wrong. And this is the pivotal point in that career: is the physics and the maths were wrong, the calculus was wrong, and that is, without dispute. And so, but he could not explain it because no mathematician. And so, says he to me, go and write it on the whiteboard. And so I start scribbling stuff on the whiteboard, and the lieutenant's boss, the captain, is a very smart man and realizes what I've just done. I've just proven with calculus that it will not work. And so with that, the meeting concludes. But what I didn't realize is that the captain was getting ready for retirement, and it was his job to get this package approved and funded. And on the other end of that transaction was his job in his retirement with that company. And I had just ruined it for him
Oh,
without knowing, of course,
without
right?
knowing,
I'm
yeah.
just curious me. don't understand politics of anything, right? And so from that point forward, my career was rubbish, right?
Yeah.
All these people have long since retired. I'm retired, and so on. But it changed the trajectory of my career in that standpoint. And so, because I had done nothing wrong, and I've actually done something very right in terms of saving the city money, um, it was kind of thought that it would be better if I got loaned out to other agencies to help them out, right?
Mm,
And it was pitched in various ways, but essentially it was to save my life,
yeah.
because it's Los Angeles, let's just say.
Yeah.
And so under Chief Bratton, I was loaned to various initiatives under the Obama administration. And so from that standpoint, I was flown all over the world to teach people stuff and to talk at different conferences and stuff. But I was never comfortable with it, because I have my presentation and then I don't understand the politics of things. And, I found myself in South Africa working and living for a bit. Um, and the whole premise of arriving there was reform of forensic sciences, and I'm part of a team and this is my job and these are the people that I'm working with, and just completely naive about context and everything. Um, but in the plan was we were going to stage crime scenes and we were going to process them and they were going to learn modern techniques and stuff. And there were assumptions baked in. But I very clearly determined that the information that we had gotten from the government was wrong. And so then I'm in the office of the head of the forensic science services for the country, Lieutenant General so and so, explaining that his people had lied to him because the tech was not acquired right, it was not installed right. And, given a few weeks, maybe a month, it could be made right, but certainly not in the time that I had left and stuff. And at the time, I'm trying to be honest, right? Because I'm an honest person. But I'm thinking to myself, oh crap, the person who put their name on that is probably in great trouble. Um,
Yeah.
and it's these kinds of things that you end up in when you don't have sensibilities and reports and you're just I found
Yeah.
myself in my life getting into those kinds of situations where the whole to part thinking, right? I see the whole of it. I see what needs to be done. I have, a master commission electrician. I can work these things out. And then our scripts, it's limited. And so here we are, right?
Yeah.
From that standpoint, I'm sure your listeners are thinking, well, what do I have to do, Jamie, as a public school teacher? and,
No,
and Gestalt process.
I think that people absolutely relate. It's like there's so many times throughout my different careers, right? Like I never landed on anything either because there was always something that happened that I caused in some way, but not because I did something wrong, because I showed something accurate. And once I showed that accurate thing, not knowing the politics behind it all, it was like
Right.
it was interesting for me in my experiences because I was really lost, like really not understanding what was happening when those things were happening. And so I was easily um, kind of, I just call it social gaslighting because that's really what happened is that I was kind of talked out of my own experiences many, many, many times throughout my life. And it's those situations, those hold apart situations where I'm seeing differently. That's it. I'm just seeing it differently and not realizing that maybe people aren't ready to see it that way. Right? And
Why? I mean, that's something that I'm dealing with now in terms of this. So you think differently, the field guide, in that, the last three big books I've written were traditionally published. And
mhm,
so you have a collection editor who, when I turned in holistic language instruction, I turned in almost 500 pages. And it was published at just about 300 pages,
mm,
right? And so they were decisions like I wanted to include lesson plans and I wanted to include stuff like that because those three books are college textbooks. They're for grad schools, right? It's not easy reading stuff. It was contracted to be for disability studies, for education studies, to teach teachers how to do this, not, a coffee table book. And so I wanted to include appropriate things. And they said, no, we'll trim these out. And so there is a flattening of my vision of things. And then it goes to copy edit. And I write in a very particular way. I speak in a very particular way. And I mean what I say when I say it. And so when copy edit is trying to harmonize this text to the other authors in the collection, I'm recalling a time when I was on a couple of TV episodes in the Discovery Network, where I had to go to voice coaching, and I had to go basically to like speech therapy, because there was this international group of people working on this issue related to the Holocaust. And they wanted us to all kind of sound the same. The reason why the mighty Thor, who is Australian, doesn't sound Australian, really.
Yeah.
And from that standpoint, for this new project, I am going to self-publish it because I want complete control, not from an ego standpoint, but from a standpoint of I feel so invested in this work. I don't want somebody to tell me I can't do it that way. I can't say it that way.
Yeah.
And so now, I've proposed the outline. I've written the foundations of things. I've gathered them. I've had people like yourself and Marge and everybody in the speech world critiquing it from different angles. And I've written stuff. The series that started today deals with an aspect of it where what happens when your future is foreclosed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so, that wasn't a fun series to write. The one behind it is not necessarily as deep and dark, but the one I just finished was burnout, right? What does it mean as a Gestalt processor to burn out? What does it feel like? And so this current series, I had to come on and do something I'm not normally doing, and that is kind of introduce it with a video and kind of explain what I'm trying to say here, this collapse of futurity. But I'm having conversations with seniors in American high school about how everything changed from the time that they were year 9 to now year 12. The
Mm-hmm.
deal's changed completely. And for some of them, college is out of the question.
Yeah.
And what does that look like when you cannot see your future? What does
Yeah.
that do to the Gestalt mind? And
Yeah.
so, when the future won't hold series deals with that, and then kind of in the same loop as my book project, I have always done Google Notebook, right? And those have been the summaries, the audio summaries for the people that can fathom 2,000 words a day. And it really screwed them up. And so I just said, I'm not doing that. And I've recorded just the poem part, or the first two, and it's a bit taxing for me. And so I may do some more tomorrow. But, I kind of explain my process in that my brain kind of works poetically. And so I start with the poem. Like when I have a concept of something, I start with the poem. I get the poem right. And
Mm-hmm.
then from the poem, I pull field notes, as I call them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm picking out all the different themes and getting that language right. And then once I have that, then I'm ready to write the introduction,
Yeah.
right? And little
Our
summaries and
processes are
stuff like that.
similar.
Yes, but I'm
Very
seeing the
similar.
whole of the series,
Yeah.
and then I can break that apart, and I can
Yeah.
create an outline for a series. And even this is different, and I kind of explain that in a piece I did about a year ago called a poem called "They Call Me Bitter," but for me, HRT was life-saving, life-changing, and it just having the right hormonal balance in my brain just unlocked a world of language I had no idea was there and made
Yeah.
me entirely more fluent. And
Well,
so for me, that power threat meaning framework, power wants to take my hormones away. Right? That
yeah,
is existential threat to me
that
and
is.
to the way I engage with the world.
Yeah.
But I've noticed, I was always kind of lyrical and poetic, but now I'm leading poetry. And even on the academic side, I'm leading with poetry. So in the journal paper, the poem came first. And then
Yeah.
I built around that and it
Yeah.
ended up at the end. So I don't, you write about a lot about spiral things. And that is essentially the process where
Mhm.
the heart of it is the poem for me. And I'm spiraling out from that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Spiraling out and up and up and down
yeah,
sometimes and back up again,
I,
you know?
But, I wrote as kind of a challenge to one of my colleagues. I'm very much in the non-Euclidean geometry crowd, and my mathematical colleagues are very much not. They're Cartesians, they're dualists, and so
Mm.
on. And so I wrote a five-dimensional proof and showed it to them, and they were mildly amused, but there was no like rebuttal or anything like that. But that's,
Yeah.
that relational field, I had to kind of situate it within space and time and meaning, and then meaning time, and that's the fifth dimension, and kind of situating all of these things out.
Yeah.
Mainly because it's in my head without language at all. It's like this is how I operate,
Yeah.
of any kind of, meaningful relationship with anybody unless the relational field is stable, right? So you cannot move from third dimension to fourth dimension, which is a quarter turn each way. And
Yeah.
then, so I'm bringing all these mathematical concepts in, but I'm trying to do them lyrically, I guess, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it
Thus the
totally
story
makes
of
sense. It totally makes sense. And it sounds really fascinating. And we're coming up on the hour, so I want to just try and start wrapping us up because I feel like we could have a
uh,
whole other conversation in this realm.
right.
Oh my gosh. And maybe we should another day, another time. But wow. Yeah. I think that I'm gonna have to rewatch our podcast because like so I tried to take notes and I was like no I just gotta be in this, right, because that is how like I I feel like I'm so different than so many people in the way that I relate. I'm very much a hermit. I would like to be that person outside of town by herself in an office, maybe with a visitor once every 2 weeks or so. I can find with my cats, like, and like that's also not like um how I always process meaning. I process meaning relationally. I do. The only way that I gathered the amount of language that I have now, and then this is fascinating to me, and I think other Gestalt language processors um, will see themselves in this, is that like I went from like a lot of scripts and very minimal amount of language, and it shifted so fast and so suddenly and so expansively right about 40 years old that it was like I'm a different human but not like it's just there's just something more. And um yeah, so I don't know, like we can leave it there and maybe talk more about I this dimensional stuff is really fascinating to me. And the idea that Cartesian um kind of mindset or worldview, I don't know perception, there is like this tension, like, and it could be a broader tension than what we think, just, in what's
Right.
happening right
For
now.
me, in kind of that spatial awareness aspect, my so you think differently cannot be linear, right? It had to be based on these quarter turns that happened. So it's organized more like a facet system than, a linear do this, do that, do that. But I remember a colleague in analytical trigonometry, she's trying to teach this concept of imaginary numbers, and the students are not resonating with it. So I thought, okay, I'll take a lesson from Story of Maths and we'll go do it. So we all go outside and we all line, find a line, we queue on it. And I say, okay, think of number lines, right? So if I was to say plus two, right, you take two steps forward. Okay. And then if I was to say times two, if the original base is two, then times two, how many steps forward are you taking? Right? Or backwards or whatever. So we're doing this, plus and minus. Now, if we multiply, how far are we going? Now, if we divide by this number, how are we going? Right. And so we're traveling in this straight line. And then I said, okay, now what number do you have to work with to turn right and go back to class? How do we get off this line?
Oh,
And they couldn't fathom it. And I said, well, that's the square root of one. That's the quarter turn. That's the brilliance of this thing that, mathematics argued with for a couple of hundred years. Like, it's not possible. You can't do this. And they
yeah.
just kind of quietly said, okay, we'll acknowledge the square root of negative one. And it's very useful in a lot of different things. And it wasn't until, hundreds of years later for it to be like robust and proven and all this kind of stuff. But for me, that quarter turn is always like stuck in my mind, that story. how do you get off that number line? How do you essentially queer the number line, right?
Mhm.
From a standpoint of dimensionality and the work that I was doing in forensics on measurements and stuff, every new dimension is 90 degrees opposed to the other, the previous two. So from a dot to a line to, X, Y, and Z. And then where do you go from there? You go to the whole field of it, that
Yeah.
relational field, that energy state that we can feel. Autistic
Mhm.
people, Gestalt processors, we feel, we resonate. If the energy is wrong, I don't care how pretty you are, that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And then once that is stable, then you can begin meaning, right? And meaning is retroactive, retrocausal. So my brain is now able to access things in different ways. And as soon as HRT comes into the question and I get language for things, it's rewriting memories.
Yeah. Oh my
Right.
gosh.
I mean, it's not as simple as like applying pronouns in the past or something like that, but
No.
it's making meanings of things, right? And not just narration, which that's the element of sensual residue, but meaning time goes spiral. It
Yeah.
goes
I call it time
multidimensionally.
jumping.
And
I call
so,
it temporal recursion.
right,
I've found language to make sense of that for myself as well. And I think this might be a common thread for anybody who comes on this podcast. I think this is where people are starting to like kind of feel the field. Maybe is it? Maybe,
right,
feel the field. And, that's why when I started this, I was like, I don't care if you're GOP. I don't care if you think non-linearly, if something in the way that I speak and something in the way that I write and something in the way that me and Jamie had a conversation today feels
right.
something, then, maybe this is the space for you to explore that a little bit more. Um, but yeah,
I
gosh,
think
thank you.
that retrocausal, like
Yes, the retrocausal.
my experience of early adult life, I felt a failure. I felt incompetent because I had no words for it,
Hmm.
right? And so how do you tell somebody how you like something, whether it's a souffle or your coffee or adult themes, if you don't have the words,
Hmm.
right? So are you incompetent because you cannot tell the barista how you like your coffee, right? And so now we have words 20 years later. Retrocausality rewrites that script and says, oh, this is why, and this is what was happening. And it doesn't change what happened. It changes the meaning that you can draw from it. Oh, I'm not incompetent. No, I'm not a dunderhead or whatever.
Hmm.
I just didn't have the words, right?
Yeah.
And you can be compassionate to yourself and you can
Hmm.
say, oh, Jamie, you didn't know. So now you know, now you have words for it.
Yeah.
It's great. Take care of yourself, in the past. Don't
Yeah.
don't rubbish yourself that far back.
Yeah. I think that we've found something in this autistic space that in different but similar ways. I see it if you're a computational scientist and you're autistic. I see it in the mystics. I see it, it's like it's this kind of recursive, fractaled meaning-making system that kind of maybe because we had to, right? Because we weren't supposed to exist. Like we had to create some form of
Right.
meaning to stay in this world. Because the meaning that is being created for us wasn't, for me, wasn't right. It was inaccurate. And when I got the words to be able to understand that and be able to write my narrative the way that it feels inside my body, it changed a lot for me. It healed so much. And I don't know, I think we might be on to something.
Yes, I know you're writing and your book is out, and I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that's wonderful. I think it can be just Marge talking about GLP. It can be just Jamie talking about Gestalt processing, and in the end, it cannot be about any one of us. It has to be about all of us. That field has to be so expansive
Hmm.
because two white people talking to each other in the Pacific time zone, um, we don't have the experience of around the world,
Hmm.
and so they need to talk.
Yeah.
They need to bring in their own history, their own constructs, and they need to enrich the field. And I hope I've provided a bit of a springboard for that, or a platform to launch from, or something to somebody around the world.
Yeah.
Um, but it's as you very much hinted at, we need to wrap this up, Jamie. I do, in my mind, I kind of want to leave that there is that, I'm always open to be invited back or whatever, but I almost hope that you don't, because I want more people to engage and more
Yeah.
people to share. And I look forward to hearing your next guest and your next guest and your next
I do
guest.
too. There are some wonderful human beings that are going to be sitting in this space with me, and I hope it opens the door for um, more people to recognize that they're welcome here in this space with me. And yeah, so thank you, Jamie, for yeah, this was fun and amazing.
I was absolutely flattered that you're like, oh, and I'm going to have Jamie on. Like, what? All right, here we
It just made
are.
sense
And
to
I
me.
was, well, I was being a bit cheeky and trying to be supportive at the same time. Like, I'm your Huckleberry, that's one of my scripts.
Yeah,
And,
I know. Uh,
I'm sure that you know more important people than me. And
oh, I
so
don't know
I'm
about that. I don't
flattered
really,
and
I don't
thankful that
put
you
people
asked.
in more or less important categories. My brain just doesn't do that. But you were the most important person today on this space. So thank you
Well, thank you.
for
And
being here.
again, I'm thankful and flattered that you invited me on.